Good evening from Vietnam. Good afternoon to you, Anna. Thanks a lot for spending your afternoon to join our program and share your amazing journey to our audience. And on behalf of the listener worldwide, we want to say thank you to you.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to speak to you. And I love the sound of the project you've been doing. What a wonderful thing to focus on, bringing good news and optimism for the future.
Thank you. And now you have a new family, new friends in this country. So if you decided to travel, make sure you let us know. If your friends travels to Vietnam, you let them know that they also have a new friend here. And I would love to invite them for a cup of coffee together. Okay.
Oh, that's very kind. Thank you. I haven't traveled so much since I had kids, but I will definitely hope to travel to Asia again. So I would love to meet you in the future. Who knows where the future takes us.
And in our culture, it's very honored if we can have you to share a little bit about who you are and the work you do. Would you please do that honor first?
Yes, of course. Thank you. So I started my career in marketing at a big consumer goods firm. So I was at Procter & Gamble in Geneva in Switzerland, actually. But at the time, even though it was a fantastic job, it didn't feel like the right path for me. And I had studied one thing. I had studied international relations and development, and I had high hopes of doing something wonderful, helping the world. And then I'd kind of ended up marketing perfume. And although it was such an amazing school and I met such fantastic people and I learned so much and it was a great experience, I always felt that disconnect between the impact I wanted to make on the one hand and then the work I was doing day to day. So I got to this point and it wasn't a big crisis. It wasn't a burnout. I wasn't made redundant. It was just kind of a quiet questioning that asked myself, okay, is this really it? Is this what I've been working so hard to do? And I began to wonder maybe if there was another way of living and working. And so that was in 2013. And since then, I've basically been redesigning and redefining what success means for myself and for the people I work with. So I work with leaders like myself who are redesigning how they work and how they lead within organizations. And I also work with individuals, founders, solopreneurs, coaches, consultants who have opted out to some extent of that system and are building their own work-life system that works for them. So it's all about redesigning what success means so that we can achieve our ambitions without burning out and without sacrificing family, health, and everything else that matters so much.
Wow, that's beautiful. And you've been doing that for 12 years, right? Well, a lot of people respond to that change during the pandemic. You're already ahead of the games, right?
Yes.
So let's travel time. Let's travel time together. Let's figure out, where do you have the desire of creating impacts onto the life of other people? That's a big desire, and it's a very noble one. Okay, so how does time travel sound to you?
Love it. Are we going back or are we going forwards?
Yeah, going backward. Let me lead the way. All right. So if you travel to my country, normally travelers, when they come to Vietnam, they will go to my country, my hometown. Also, it's a beautiful place, and that place was devastated, destroyed through the wars here. Okay, so when I grow up, it's very poor village, very poor family. One night we had electricity. I can see you, right? And then the next night we did not have electricity, so I could see nothing. And my first dream about the future was to become an astronaut, flying to the moon. I can see the moon now, okay? And that would be wonderful if we, for me, if we can see how bright up there. But life has taken me to a very different path, doing very different things, right? So for Anna, when she was little, what was her dream about the future works that she is going to do?
I love that question. And funnily enough, I shared your passion. I was so interested in the stars and I used to look up, and I even almost went to study astrophysics, but I ended up not doing that. But certainly when I was little, I loved asking why. I asked, the meaning of life, basically. I looked at the stars, and I love what you've shared there, because we've grown up in such different environments, and yet of course we shared the same night sky. So we see the same, it's daytime here, but I mean, in theory, I see the same moon as you and we see the same stars. So I think that's so innate to who we are as human beings, to want to explore and go on adventures and to see the world. And I definitely shared that with you. So that was something that I certainly never pursued professionally, but it was an early dream that I shared with you to go out into the stars and see what was out there in the universe.
Wow. At young age, you ask the question, what's the meaning of life? That's a huge question for a little girl like you back then to ask. You could ask a lot of other questions, what kind of perfume is smell better, how can I, what kind of dress that make me be more beautiful, or which you already beautiful, like why you ask yourself the question that is so hard for so many people to find the answer.
Do you know, that's such an interesting question, and I think it's not that it's unique to me. In fact, as I said, I think that's so innate to the human existence, but we forget. So my children are, well, my son is turning 5 in a couple of days and my daughter's 6, so they're very little. And of course, as we all know with children, they ask why, what's this, why is that, what are you doing that for? Oh, and it's exhausting for us as grown-ups because we've stopped asking those questions. We just assume that life is what it is. And to be fair to us, we don't have time or energy to question everything. If I every day said, oh my gosh, what's that there? What's that? Why am I going, it's not possible to live your life that way. But unfortunately, I think we've lost a lot of that curiosity. So I think most of us are born with that innate wonder. Of course, the first couple of years of our lives as babies, we go from being a helpless little infant to being able to walk and talk and do so many things. And for whatever reason, we get stuck in this kind of comfort zone where we just, or even worse, I guess, that a less positive way of saying it would be on autopilot and in this like conveyor belt. We don't look up and question things. So a big thing for me that I question now is the whole industrial system of the Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 office that came from, factory workers. And it's a very disconnected system that isn't made for life and business today. And yet we all go, oh no, it's Monday again, I hate my job, and then hooray, it's Friday, I get to get, it's just nobody looks around and says, hang on a second, who designed this system? Why do we keep going in it? So I think it's not unique to me at all. It's just that I was very lucky now, as of 2013, as you said, as of 12 years ago, that I reminded myself of those questions and started asking them again.
Eventually we'll get to that 2013 because that is the important milestone, timetable in your life. Okay, you asked big question, but at the same time you had a big ambition of changing and creating impact, right? And then I think that is something that leading to 2013, that when you ask a big question and then you revert engineering your life and redefine the way that Anna is going to show up in the world and helping other people to show up in the world. Help me before you get into that stage. Was there something that you growing up and you learn along the way that this is something that you would want to do, or was that somebody in the family, in the communities, or inside of your DNA? You already have it inside of you. Where did it come in from?
I think I did well at school, so I was sort of good at all the different subjects, and I got good grades, and I think the expectation then is that you will be successful in life, whatever that means. And in fact, I recently rediscovered that in my school yearbook I was voted most likely to succeed, and I think that was because I had, I was top of my class, I graduated valedictorian, I got the grades, and I was academically, I don't want to say gifted, but I did well, I ticked the boxes. And so the expectation with that is obviously I'm going to go to a great university, I'm going to get an amazing job, of course I can change the world. But what I discovered later on was, coming naively as a student with no real world experience at all into wanting to work at the United Nations or a non-governmental organization, what could I possibly bring? I had my enthusiasm and I'd studied, I'd read some books, but really, I think we overestimate our ability to change the world when we're younger. We still look at people like Greta Thunberg and then we think maybe we don't, but she's quite exceptional. When we're older, then I think again we lose that, right? We have actually more experience, more ability to help, but we've kind of lost the idealism and optimism that we had when we were younger. So I think to some extent I just assumed, of course I'm going to do something amazing, and that's why the disconnect was I looked around and I thought, hang on a second, what's gone wrong? Why am I not out in the world doing, fulfilling my potential and doing all these amazing things? Whether it was dreaming of being an astronaut, or at one point I dreamt of being an actress or a journalist, none of those dreams came true. And to some extent you could say it's just childhood fantasy, But, you know, it's also very common, I think, for us to end up on an accidental career path, right? We just take a job because we need the money. 10, 20 years later, oops, I'm now doing something that isn't in any way aligned with where I thought I'd be or where I want to be.
Wow. So bring me to that 2013. Okay. Because normally people change when something really happened. And maybe like you say, you did not have burned out, you did not in stress, you did not have anything that, you know, got replacement on the job or something like that. So everything was like very beautiful and successful, right, in that journey. And normally people in that autopilot will keep let they carry, let life carry, with more money, with more title, with more success, with more achievements, with new cars, new homes, and new travels. But Anna back then decided to look around, to observe her life, observe life around her also, and ask questions about, you know, what is that about life that she wanted to do. What made you do that?
Yeah, so it was this kind of sense of a disconnect, and it wasn't a big dramatic moment, but professionally I had done at that organization, I'd done kind of a creative design role, I'd done more of a business operational role, then I was promoted, and I was working in digital marketing, and digital at the time was quite new and exciting, but they wanted to put me back into kind of a business as usual role. And I thought, well, hang on a second, I've got this amazing opportunity to really be pioneering and at the cutting edge, and they just want to put me back in the business. So there was a professional reason for thinking, oh, you know, I'd like to go elsewhere and do something more exciting. And then personally, I looked around and all my friends were getting married and having children, whereas I was single, and I felt like, oh, hang on a second, I'm not there yet either. So I felt like I'd been very comfortable in my little bubble, as you said, comfortable job, salary, all that. And I took it step by step. So I asked for a sabbatical. So I traveled to South America, unfortunately not to Asia that time, but to South America for 3 months. And it was halfway through that, thanks to, I think, being away from my usual environment and having a different perspective, I met people who were, you know, retired, unemployed, divorced, single, married, whatever. And I just opened my eyes to different ways of living and working than my own little experience. And it was halfway through those travels that I then told my boss, no, okay, I'm quitting. So it was a very un-me thing to do. It wasn't very sensible because I had no plan. I had a bit of savings, and, you know, I didn't have a family and I had no financial obligations, but it was still a pretty risky move, I suppose, just to say, no, I'm going to cut everything that's been working so far and I don't know what's next.
Where's it in South America?
So I mean, I had 3 months, and I started in Ecuador, and I did, you know, Peru, Bolivia, Argentina, teeny tiny bit of Brazil, Paraguay, Uruguay. I think I did 8 countries, so I managed quite a bit in my 3 months.
Why South Africa? South America?
I always love the Hispanic culture. I love Spanish. I don't dance salsa, but I like the music, and there was just always something very romantic about it. Also, I don't know if you know the Disney Pixar film Up. This old man lives in a house, and this big construction company wants to tear his house down, and he ends up, it sounds very ridiculous, getting a load of colourful balloons onto his house. So he flies up into the air and flies to South America, and he says, adventure is out there. And that was my metaphor for, I was like, adventure is out there, I'm going to go to Paradise Falls in South America, and I'm going to live my big adventure as well.
Wow. And when you come back from that, you know, like 3 months, right, and then you realize that the corporate world is no longer something that fit for you, and that is a big decision to make, you know, when you came to your boss and hand out the resignation letter and say, okay, I'm going to start something new, right? So what came to your head back then about the new venture, the new things that you are going to do versus the comfortability life that you've been having when you come back into the corporate world?
So the first few months were incredible, because basically I you know, people said, oh, Paul, you're back from your holiday. I was like, no, I've quit. It's amazing. And, you know, of course, I had savings and I had money and I had freedom. So I had a lot of freedom, and I traveled, and I was at the point of everything is possible, because I hadn't yet faced the reality of what it means to work for yourself and to make money. So I was in a very brief moment of wow. And then, of course, the reality hit. But to be honest, I always say that you think the big moment of quitting is like the big scary thing. And after that, you live your best life. But actually, of course, that was just the first step. And so for the next 2 years or so, I very luckily landed on my feet, and I did digital marketing consulting. So the same kind of work, but with different companies. So I was earning a lot of money still, and I was able to travel. And that's when I went to Malaysia and Singapore and Australia and a few other countries. So, you know, the first couple of years, I got a bit more freedom and flexibility, but I still wasn't doing what I felt was fulfilling work. And so it took another decision a couple of years later to go to sort of quit again and say, no, hang on a second, this is not why I left my job. I want something more. And then that led to very profound, I guess, self-discovery and listening to podcasts and reading books and coaching and so on to discover what I really wanted to do.
Teach us that process. You know, when you left the corporate for another job that you run on your own, and then you left the project, the work that you run on your own for another work that you run on your own again, which is more meaningful, which is more aligned with what you want to do. So how did you come up with that?
It's such a good question. I think one of the things I did was reflecting on my values. And I maybe can't remember exactly what they were, but I think it was freedom and authenticity. And something else, I've forgotten the third one, but I just wanted to be true to who I was. And I guess I felt that in some environments at work, you kind of have to perform in a certain way and you can't be yourself completely. And also, as I said, freedom to have creative freedom to choose the projects you work on, when and where and so on. And of course, at the time, I didn't have a family, but fast forward to now, having the flexible business model really helps me now around childcare. So, you know, it's that wasn't the reason why I did it, but it really, really helped. One of the books I wrote was Outside of the 9 to 5, and in it I have 5 pillars, which is as close to a process that I could get to. And so I said, you need to start by defining what success looks like, because often this is the whole conveyor belt. I'm not even stopping to ask myself, what am I working towards? The second pillar is developing confidence and resilience, because the reality is there'll be a bit of a roller coaster, right? You have ups, you have downs. It's not always going to be happy rainbow land. The third one was really choosing your business model. And to be honest, that's where I've really focused now in the last few years, because I think we so quickly just take someone else's blueprint and follow that new definition of success. But again, we haven't thought about, well, hang on, this is my situation, my health and family and income goals and things I want to do. So choosing the right business model. The fourth pillar is building your personal brand. And then the fifth one, and I know you mentioned this at the beginning, is work-life integration. So really designing the practicalities of what it looks like. So that was, I guess, what I discovered through going through that process myself. And then gradually, because of that, I began coaching others through that same transition out of corporate. And that's how I came up with those 5 pillars, which then became my book, and a lot of my coaching philosophy was built around that in the early days, I guess.
Anna, I think that one thing that you mentioned in here is the authenticity of discovering, because a lot of people will bring the model from someone else and adopt it and testing it and create and calling that is their success framework or something like that, right? But you create the model by your own self, and where did you get that idea or that strength of creating that later on helping you to I note the note in here is redesigning and redefining, you know, so that is something that coming from within. Teach us, where did you view that mentality?
I think it came from that childhood curiosity that I talked about, right? That it's just being curious. And initially I was coaching individuals, and then I noticed that there are patterns. You know, one client is needing to do his values, and then I realized another one also found it useful to do. So then, okay, you know, working out what your values are, that's a really important exercise. And then gradually I kind of build up my approach through working with other people. So it's a combination of my own exploration and working with others. The coach training I did, I was also very lucky to land on a training that didn't just impose their model, but actually encouraged us to develop our own tools and frameworks. So I developed a framework around personal growth versus comfort. So this idea of comfort zone was big, and you know, it really encouraged us to find our own proprietary methodology rather than just taking some existing model and applying it. So I think it was a combination of my own innate curiosity and then being lucky enough to have a program then that sort of supported us in finding that as well.
There was a word notice in there, and my former CEO always tell me that look in front of you, because opportunities in front of you, like opportunity happen in front of everybody, but only the people be able to see it and do something with that. So notice and do something with that. We'll be the ones who can change the world, who can make something happen, right? So how did you, you know, see things that people don't see, right? And make sense of that and create something that can help you and people to flourish.
I think one thing that comes to mind is creating space for that, right? Because I left, the big epidemic I see now is this busyness. You ask someone, how are you? Oh, I'm busy. Back-to-back meetings and rushing from school drop-off to their, you know, meeting and emails and always on. There's no capacity for us as leaders or as humans to reflect and to notice things, because we're just, oh my gosh, I've just got to survive. I've got to get through the day. I've got this to-do list. And how could you possibly have the presence and awareness to notice what's going on? I think that's the trap that we've kind of created for ourselves. So incredibly, of course, in a smaller way, I think when you go off on holiday, people will often begin to go, oh, I could quit my job and I could be an author and I could travel. And then as soon as you're back in your job, forget all about that and you're back into the treadmill, right? And so a holiday helps. For me, it was the sabbatical initially, traveling for 3 months and then leaving corporate entirely just gave me that blank canvas. And it's really scary, I tell you, because there's this vacuum. If you take away your busyness and the routine you've been in since you were, what, 4 or 5, the 9 to 5 kind of Monday to Friday, suddenly like, what do I do with myself? What on earth? How do I spend my time? What do I want is a really difficult question to answer. And that's pretty scary, but I always say scary and exciting come together. And you need that vacuum, you need that space in order to then be curious, explore, notice, and then start rebuilding from there.
So for that resilience to, you know, to I mean, not the resilient now, but the courageous and the strength to come into the unknown and make sense of that. Was that something that you built yourself, or was that, you know, like maybe your father has it, your mother had it, your grandparents had it, that they've been your role model for a long time?
Do you know, not at all, because and my dad's parents, my grandfather on my dad's side had left school, I think at 11. At that time, you know, you had to start working when you were very young, and they had to make money. They were very much working class. My mum's parents, for actually very tragic reasons, were able to go to university, which was quite rare for that generation. And both of them then had sort of corporate jobs, I guess you'd say, their whole career. And then again, my parents both had big kind of corporate jobs to some extent as well. So the entrepreneurial thing was not in my wildest dreams. I'm not a risk taker. I don't identify myself with the cliche of what you think an entrepreneur is. I'm very much a good girl. I follow the rules to my detriment. In fact, I think that really holds me back working for myself, because I would do much better if I took some shortcuts and I was a bit more scrappy and a bit bolder. But it's something I'm working on. But it's definitely not natural. So if I can do it, everybody can do it. This is what I would say to everybody. It doesn't take a certain personality or a certain background. It starts with that curiosity, as you said, noticing things, solving problems. And then, of course, the question is if it suits you and your lifestyle and personality and so on. But in terms of, it doesn't require any particular kind of personality or path. And there are so many different ways to arrive at it, right? Some people start their own business straight out of school, and some have decades of corporate experience before they then start something.
Wow. So if you have people to redefine success, so in your own word, how do you define success?
How I define success. I
Yeah.
love that question, and I always feel like I'm pressured to say something very wise. My current definition is being present where I am, which means I don't feel guilt that I'm here instead of being with my children. I don't feel resentment that, oh, I can't believe I'm in this really awful meeting and then I'm having to do this work that I'm not interested in, and I don't regret that when I'm older, right? So of course it can't be 100% that. Sometimes I need to do some boring accounting, or I sometimes, you know, I'm sick and I'm not doing exactly what I want to be doing. But the general principle is that I am intentional and present with how I spend my time and energy, and I take initiative. I guess I have agency is the way to say it, that I know I take accountability and ownership of how I spend my time. So I'm not outsourcing decisions, I'm not blaming other people. I am responsible, and therefore I choose how I'm spending my time and energy, and I'm exactly where I want to be. So now I'm talking to you because I've chosen to speak to you, and it's one of the best conversations I've had in a long time, if not ever. So I love it, and I'm fully here. And it would be a very different story if my kids were banging on the door, or if I was like, oh, I'm missing, it's a beautiful day and I wish I was, whatever it is, right? So you choose where you are and you're fully present, and then, you know, that for me is my definition of success.
So you say that it's a current definition, which means that you define success differently before, and now it evolved into a different definition, or what?
It's very insightful that you pick up on that, and I think that's an important nuance, that your definition can and should evolve. And one concept that I really like is that of seasons, because 20-year-old Anna is very different to 40-year-old Anna. And, you know, in my 20s, it was work hard, play hard, and, you know, long days in the office, but also partying with my friends. I think I had a different definition of success then. When I first left my job, you know, 2013, 14, 15, I wanted that freedom, and I traveled, and I was the digital nomad, and it was all about rebelling against kind of the corporate. And now, both professionally, I'm very happy to work with corporate because I've kind of let go of that hangover from being in that world, and I'm really passionate about working with leaders and really making the change from the inside. And personally, of course, for me, I want to be present with my young children. So the working day is between, you know, 9 and 3, strictly speaking, sometimes a bit more, sometimes a bit less. But I want to work in the hours where my children are at school, and then I want to be with them outside of that time. So of course, you could argue that the definition in terms of being present could hold true for all of those things. So I think that is quite an eternal evergreen message. But there are variations in how that manifests, I suppose, in terms of the work I was doing when I was traveling versus the work I was doing when I first met my partner in London versus the work I'm doing now, living with my children by the sea, and, you know, with 2 children at school. It evolves through different seasons, and I think that's okay. And allowing yourself to evolve, and your business or your work to evolve, and not clinging on to what old you wanted is really, really important.
Really cool. So how do we know that it's time for us to make another decision, or you know, like make another definition of you know, what is success to be to us, or like, or what trigger that we need to measure?
That's a really important observation, and I think for some people it is a dramatic trigger. It could be burnout, it could be a family health crisis. You know, I worked with someone whose partner then had cancer, or perhaps a heart attack or something, to remind you that life is short, really. It could be that you're promoted and you get everything you wish for, and then you think, hang on, why am I not happy? Or it could be like it was for me, more of a gradual murmuring that just, it feels like, you know, I'm just not where I want to be. And I think the distinction is it just, oh, I'm having a bad day, and tomorrow, next week, I'll be good again and I'm happy and I like my job? Or is this actually, no, this is a pattern. I am in the wrong place. I am living according to a wrong and old, you know, badly fitting definition of success. And I think that's the real question, because of course, for example, with burnout, most of us only recognize it when it's too late, in the sense that I'm already burnt out. It's much harder to anticipate because we say, oh no, but I thrive on pressure, and, you know, it happens to other people, it's not going to happen to me. So it's very easy just to keep going. And of course work should be hard, and of course there are meetings all the time, and of course I don't have time to see my children. You just tell yourself these stories. But it's very powerful if you can have that awareness again and begin to ask yourself those questions. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to rip everything up and quit your job and move to Bali, but it does mean that you can begin to ask questions and make some smaller shifts, maybe set some different boundaries, make some different choices over the longer term.
And then what took you so long to write your first book?
What? Thanks for that difficult question. So you asked what I wanted to be when I was younger. The other thing was a writer. And I had this idealistic view of being a writer, which was, sort of J.K. Rowling or Stephen King sitting by a lake writing books and being a bestseller. And I think that dream is so theoretical and idealistic that it feels completely impossible. So instead of trying, we just leave it up there on the shelf. Oh, I'd really like to be a writer, but never do any writing. And I think I gradually realized, hang on, if I want to write, I need to write. And so I started writing my blog. And then I started very much like you, in fact, interviewing people very selfishly because I wanted to learn interesting things about different people who are making different choices. And then my first book was actually a bit of a lazy book because it was a collection of stories of the people I'd spoken to. And then the second book was more my actual methodology, and that was sort of a proper book. And I have just started working on my next book, my third book too. So it does take longer than I'd like to, but I get there in the end.
You mentioned one word that my wife and I always love to hear is the word I think, right? And for a very long time, we believe that the thinking is so important for us to make any transformation, for anyone to make transformation in their life, right? And if you think right, then maybe you make a better decision, and better decision may lead you to a better outcome, hopefully, right? And one of the best way that we can think of to help people to improve their ability to think is simply by asking, who joins our program, like you are joining today, this question. And then, how have you been growing your ability to think over the years?
Oh, that's a really profound question to ask. Yeah, and it's a tricky one today, right? Because with the incredible amounts of information, and of course we had Google at our fingertips, but now with AI, there's so much information, and there's this desperate urge to read more and to pack our brains, and there's too much signals from TV and advertising and people and podcasts and so on. So ironically, I think a lot of that gets in the way of the thinking, right? We use ChatGPT to write a quick post instead of sitting down to think about what do I actually want to say, and maybe not posting every day on LinkedIn, but just doing one good post. So for me, that's definitely a challenge. And also, as I said, the decision to leave my job initially, I had lots of time, not so much money. When you then have a business, you have obligations. I don't have a team or anything like that. It's not like I have an office or an inventory and that kind of thing, but I still have to think commercially about doing things that people will buy and about replying, and there's a lot of doing stuff. So ironically, what I do a lot with my clients is looking at our week and going, okay, can we carve out time, whether you call it CEO time or strategy time? In fact, yesterday, one podcast I was supposed to do was cancelled, and I just had the whole day, and I decided I'm just going to do some thinking, which feels like a waste of time. But of course, it's the most important time, because it's really clarifying whether it's your messaging or what you want to do or what the next move is. And so I'm by no means good at this, but it's something I try to do, is reminding myself to create that time, and I guess turning off the noise a little bit as well. There's a phase for being open and listening and learning, but then there has to be a time when you close off and you incubate and you kind of create versus consuming, I think, is a really important distinction, right? So to think and to have your own original thought, you do need to at some point sort of put to one side what other people are saying, turn off that noise and just sit with yourself. And the best time I find is when I'm on a train or a plane, when there's no Wi-Fi, and I can just sit with a pen and paper or an iPad, whatever it is, right? That's my favorite time. And I have the biggest, incredible, life-changing insights, or in the shower or going for a run. That's when it comes. It doesn't come when you're sitting, at your computer writing emails, right? So it's finding ways to carve out that time, and it's probably away from your work rather than within it.
Beautiful. And when I look at your journey so far, okay, that's one term that I really enjoy seeing is the term newness. Have you ever heard that term newness?
Tell me more.
Okay. I interview over 1,200 leaders, best-selling author, like astronaut, high political, military officer, political leaders, and top-notch universities, professors, and scientists, right? And throughout all of those conversations, newness is something that easily see for them because they will look at things and they see the new thing to do. They will look at life and they will be able to see something new that other people won't be able to do, to see. Like you look at your life, which is already beautiful to many, many people looking at it, right? And you ask yourself the question and you start a new journey. You went to South America to look for something new, so that to respond to something new that you would want to do in life also. And you have people to create something new in their life through your works also. Redefine, which is new, right? Define something new. So that is what we call newness. And people with that newness ability will have more resilience in life, be able to not only adopt to change, but leading change, creating change, so heading change, you know, and I see easily inside of you, you are also having that. You don't know what the change will the new will lead in you too, whether or not it's gonna up or down, but you are ready for it. You're taking it on. Okay, so if that is from my perspective, but if from your perspective, I want people to have the confidence themselves to build the capacity of newness, with the mentality of having newness in life also. So if you look at your life, all the life of the people that you admire, you've been working with them, who have similar kind of newness, like mentality inside of them. And you tell our audience about how your observation with that. So what can you tell them?
Well, I think there's a tension there because there's a really important skill set, I guess you'd call it, to have the growth mindset, to be curious, to learn, to look for that newness. And there's the danger of shiny object syndrome and the attraction of always thinking the grass is greener on the other side. And again, I'm writing this book, but actually, no, I'm going to write this other book. And then you end up not finishing any books because you're always looking for that newness. So I find that's a tension that I experience. There's real value in being consistent and sticking with a particular thing for long enough to get results. And there's a very innate, natural desire for growth in nature, right? We don't want to stagnate. We're a bud, we grow, we sort of then hibernate and we come back. There's this cycle and season. So that's one observation that I would say, that we don't want to go too far down the always new, because then we're chasing these milestones. We're constantly looking for something better and forgetting to be present and look at the wonderful things we have. So for me, the difficulty or the challenge is to be content with what we have and be open to the future. So if I want to write a new book, I don't think, oh, once I've written that book, then I'll be a global thought leader and I'll be a millionaire and my life will be perfect. I think I'm happy as I am now, I'm content, and I would like to write this book and I'm going to enjoy the process of writing the book. It may do well, it may not, but my goal is to write something I'm proud of, and hopefully it will resonate with, there's just a reframing of why you're chasing that newness, I think. But to answer your question a bit more specifically, I suppose it is that curiosity again, putting yourself in different environments. Some of the early things that I did when I first started this journey was going to an event. One in particular, I don't remember what they said or who it was, but I remember the people I met. And for the first time, the people in that room were like me. They felt a bit trapped in successful jobs and felt like there must be something more. And so just going to, a talk, or listening to a podcast, or having a conversation with someone, or I don't know, going to a painting evening, or an art exhibition, or something that you wouldn't usually do, I think can train you, give you that habit of seeing new things and learning things. If we're always the same routine, the same friends, even the same places, the same bubble, and that's where I felt I was a little bit, 12 years ago, then that's when perhaps we can stagnate a bit. So it's just taking those little steps and sprinkling in some newness. It doesn't have to be, again, ripping everything up and starting from scratch. Maybe a couple of times in your life that's the right thing, but the rest of the time it's rather little shifts, little steps. And in fact, my brand is one step outside. So it's one step outside your comfort zone. It's not like give everything up and start from zero and become a monk. It's very much take little steps to make shifts. And I think hopefully that's reassuring to people that you don't have to change everything completely, because that's quite terrifying. And I think that's when you get into panic zone. If you go too far too quickly, that's no good for anyone. So taking little steps and having that curiosity, I think, is so powerful.
Your work is now helping leaders, managers, individuals to have a work-life balance, to understand what success truly means for themselves, right? And to us, that is, you're helping them to create something sustainable for their future. Because if they keep running in their own engines, then one day that everything gonna break and fall apart, right? And for a long time, not for a long time, for 2 months ago, my wife and I, we acquired a website called a Sustainability Mind. So we want to help people with defining a sustainability mindset, what it is, right? And your work is to help people to define, that exactly what it is for them. So it's really interesting for me to understand from your perspective, if you define a sustainability mind, so what is that to you?
It's great, and it's a funny word because sustainability can also get into the environmental eco territory, but for me it's the cliche that it's a marathon, not a sprint. It's that we can't just, when we go on holiday, if you've had this experience, it's quite common, I think, we're incredibly productive those last few hours and days. Suddenly we tick off everything, we finish projects that have taken months because we know we're going to go off on holiday or something, right? But that's not sustainable. I can have a day, a week, when I'm like, oh, I'm writing this and I'm doing that and I'm on fire. Inevitably the next week I'll either be ill or just tired and I won't get anything done. And it's just the cyclical nature again. It's the cycles, it's the seasons, it's the natural rhythm we have. So for me, something that's sustainable is being in it for the long haul and knowing, let's say I'm starting my business, I could hustle and go all in, and there's this 996 trend now coming from China and Silicon Valley that you work from 9 till 9, 6 days a week. And that's being lauded as wow, that's incredible, they're so committed and so on. And I just think it's so far from where we should be. And so understanding that we need to build in those boundaries, the rest, we're actually more productive when we have that space, like we talked about, for creativity, for innovation. Leaders need to role model that for their team. There's no point in saying, oh, we value work-life balance, and then sending emails at 11 o'clock at night and meeting invites for 6 in the morning. It's absurd, right? So it's being in it for the long haul. And I think it's also, there's a dimension of being more human. I think it's, we're not machines. We're not in that factory area. We're not robots yet, so it's about being human. And that's, it seems so obvious, and yet it feels quite far removed sometimes from how we treat each other in the workplace. So it's more human, it's long term, and overall just a more balanced way of going about things.
And then I think it's also a give and take approach. If the leaders can change the way that they do it, and then the way that the thing that they receive back also will be totally different.
But it's so hard because you hear people saying it's the generational divide that we hear about. It used to be that millennials are so lazy and entitled, and now of course it's Gen Z. And I've heard from colleagues who are my age or perhaps a little bit older somehow saying, oh, but I had to work this hard, so they should have to work this hard too. And in reality, the things that so-called entitled Gen Z are saying is, I want to enjoy my work. I don't want to have a mental health crisis and burn out. I want to, sometimes have a break. I want to connect with a purpose. I want my values to be aligned with the work I do. Of course, shouldn't that be something that we all strive for? But because we've kind of learned the system, we're kind of so embedded in the system that created us, it's very hard then as leaders to open up to that. It feels unfair that they get to, how dare they get to ask all these questions when we just kind of worked hard and sacrificed everything for success, So there's an element of, we just need us old folk to die off and then things will change, but there's also an opportunity to actually do everything we've said, be curious, be open-minded, look at how we're doing things and see if we can't redesign how we're working so we can benefit as well, right? Rather than saying, oh, these entitled youngsters, thinking, okay, what could it look like if I became an entitled youngster as well, whatever my age?
That's why we appreciate your works, because they start with us. So your works help us to, to start the journey ourselves and then leading the way, right? And I think that leading by example is important. I have a few last questions for this beautiful conversation, okay? And some of that we travel to the past. One of that we travel to the past, and then the rest of that we travel to the future, okay? I want you to imagine one scenario that you were young, little girl, okay, little Anna. You lay down on the grass at night. You looked into the dark sky, you saw stars, right? And in her head, you had a lot of questions about who am I, what life is all about, the big questions, all right? And now you and me gonna go to that spot. We're gonna lay next to her, and then you're gonna introduce that you are Anna of the future, and you're gonna tell her about some wisdom of the future that you want that little Anna to know and to do and to change and to embrace, or to do whatever that you want to talk to that little Anna. So what would you say to her?
What comes to mind is to say that there is no right answer. Because I think as a student at school, we're trained to, especially, as I said, I got good grades, there is a correct answer. You get the tick, you get the gold star, or if your school has the same kind of celebration of hard work, but it's very much, the teacher says, good girl, certificate, top of the class, you got it right, you got it wrong. That's very, very clear. And the truth is the real world is not like that. There is no right answer. And I know that constantly searching for that is a wasted life. So we're then looking for someone else to validate my path. So whether it's you telling me, yeah, that's great that you're working for yourself, well done, or it's the likes on LinkedIn or the followers on YouTube or whatever it is, it's allowing those external metrics and other people to define success. So it's really hard to know what younger me would have listened to, but I'd like to think that if I could get across that, look, there's no right answer. So be curious, explore, test things, learn. That is hopefully a message that we as younger, children and students and so on can internalize. And it's something I try to talk to students when I, do go to schools and universities to talk to. But allowing yourself to be open. And if there is a right answer, by the way, only you can know it, right? You're the only one who has to live this life. And so if there is one, then trust internally, trust whether it's your gut, your heart, your soul, whatever it is you want to trust, something inner wisdom, and that's what really works. So there's no right answer.
No right answer is the answer, right? So for that little girl to explore herself in the world, like you said, then only she can find that answer for herself. Now, heading to the future, I think that we are going to do another global project in November and December and launch it in January 1st. So that is a beautiful time for us, for everybody around the world to reflect and to have New Year resolutions. And for them to have New Year with something exciting, I think it's good for them to have options. And if they have option is, one way to have good option is to hear from amazing people out there of what they are focusing on 2026. So I'm curious to know what is that, Annie, is maybe the one thing that you want to share with our audience that you are focusing to accomplish or to do in 2026 that you want to share with us. So we're going to celebrate with you in advance.
Well, that's very kind. I mean, to some extent, you're a bit too early because I haven't sat down to do my goals for next year. One insight that I would share is, I suppose, that the traditional New Year's resolutions and goals can be quite limiting. I think a lot of people talk about this, and I'm sure other people have said it before, but I think 8% of people actually achieve their resolutions, right? So I want to go to the gym, or I want to be fitter, or whatever it is. It's so meaningless. So for me, it's been more, I went through a phase of having a word for the year, which I found very powerful. So it could be, trying to think what it was. It could be focus on what matters, or it could be bold, or it could be pause. I don't know. It could be just a guiding theme for your year. So I'm coaching myself through this because I'm thinking, what would my word be? And for me, I'm at an interesting point because I did all this soul searching and so on, you know, again, 10, 12 years ago. I suppose I've done it a few times since. I had a bit of an existential crisis a couple of years ago when I had been working for myself for 10 years because it felt like a milestone. And then it's, I should be further along. Do I still want to do these things? So I'm kind of just coming out of that. For me, I'm excited now to see how I can be more bold and more ambitious, because I talked about how 12 years ago I stepped out of my comfort zone and I was bold and creative and courageous. It's very easy to be drawn back into your comfort zone. So like I said, it's not just one big decision. And I think, you know, of course, COVID, as you talked about at the beginning, having young children, you know, a lot of things have kind of shrunk my comfort zone again a little bit. So things that before were super scary now feel quite normal for me, but I also feel like there's more I can give, and I'm quite curious about what that could look like. So without in any way blaming myself for playing small the last 10 years, I'm also opening my mind to think, okay, what if I thought bigger? What if I, you know, look to do bigger speaking engagements, or, you know, put this book that I've just started out and it's really, you know, a bigger deal perhaps than it was in the past, you know, trying to do some thought experiments of how could I play a bigger game. So that's the question that suits my stage of business, and it could be interesting for your listeners too, if you feel like, okay, I'm quite happy with where I've been, and, you know, I've done these things and so on, but actually, is there something more? And maybe it taps into your newness piece again, it taps into that curiosity, and, you know, not to rip things up and change things just for the sake of it, but be open to, could there be something more? Can I fulfill, you know, a higher potential than I am right now? So that's the question I'll ask myself, and I'll see if I can come up with a word for myself for next year.
You have a superpower inside of you to have the answer for that, for sure, because that happened 12, 13 years ago when you asked that question. For sure that's going to happen this time, and every time you ask that big question. All right, the last question. If you look at your life and amazing people, amazing things, you know, that happen around you, right? And if there's boiled down to one skill, only one, okay, that Anna thinks that everybody should learn and master to have a fulfilling life, a work life, but a successful life, and what would that skill be?
It has to be curiosity. And I don't know if it's a skill that we learn or just that we need to remind ourselves that we have. But everything we've said, you know, observing things, having that awareness, speaking to other people, I think so many arguments would be avoided if we were a little bit more curious and less judgmental and less trying to persuade other people, right? You know, there's a lot of uncertainty at the moment. There's a lot of crazy stuff going on in the world. How can we be curious about what's happening, and also to some extent let go of things that are outside of our control, and then look at where we do have agency to do things and explore that. So for me, curiosity is, you know, as a coach, it's one of the core skills. And as a child looking at the stars, it's definitely something that was always central to me, and I think it'll stand you in good stead. However much the world around you changes and how technology evolves and so on, curiosity is always going to be one of the biggest strengths in my mind.
Anna, this is such a beautiful conversation and a lot of insights in there, a lot of beautiful wisdom that you share into this conversation, and thanks a lot for spending an hour with us, for sharing your stories, your work, and I look forward to seeing you, not in Thailand, not in Malaysia, not in Singapore, you and your family in Vietnam. And if you travel here, you let us know. We would love to have a cup of tea, coffee, and take your family around, okay?
I will do. Thank you. And thank you for such thoughtful questions. You made me really think. And these are things I've talked about many, many times, but I really felt present with you and I really enjoyed the conversation. So congratulations on this incredible project. And thank you for the honor of having me be part of it.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And you have a beautiful afternoon. Say hello to your family, please.
Thank you. You too. Say hello to Viv.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much.